I want to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day to speak with us about salmon today.
Hi, nice to be here.
So let's start by talking about salmon in the Yukon. What is the significance of salmon to Indigenous people there?
Well, salmon to us is everything. Salmon is life. They have given their lives for us for thousands of years, and now we're at a declining numbers every year, and we don't have fish camps, so that connection with salmon is being lost. So we don't have fish camps anymore, not in our traditional territory, and most of the Yukon hasn't been fishing for the last 20 years in some cases, and most recently some of our other communities have not been fishing for the last couple of years just because the numbers are so low. And with them not being here, that takes away more than just the salmon. It's a way of life. It's activities at fish camp, sharing of stories, listening to our elders, and having that connection with the river, with the land, with our elders, with our ancestors. So when we lose that, we lose a lot of our culture and our traditional practices, and knowing how to respect and have that relationship with salmon, that is gone. So we are working really hard to try and bring back salmon, and even if we're not fishing, looking at ways that we could still connect with salmon and spread those stories and talk about salmon in a good way and ask for the salmon to come back. And we're bringing back these gatherings to recognize that we need to still reconnect and remember and listen to the ways that our elders have told us to have respect for the land and each other and the water.
Sorry, Brandy. So what do you think is behind the decline in these numbers over the last number of years?
Well, there's been multiple factors that we've recognized, and what the elders have told us over the years is, where the ocean is warming, the water is warming, it could be heat stress. There's been other factors in the past of, mismanagement and overfishing and bycatch and commercial fishing in the ocean. But the main reason that we're looking at right now, because the Yukoners haven't been fishing, and neither has the Alaskans on the U.S. side for the last couple of years, is really climate change. Climate change and some environmental factors that go with that. We've had, the last couple of years, we've had record snowpacks, we've had more rain, we've been flooding, our glaciers are melting, our permafrost is melting, and so the water warming can have a major heat stress on the salmon. And when they're migrating upriver, the water is higher than it's ever been. And then we've had a couple of years where it's lower because it's really hot and warm, and that can cause their migrations and their movements to slow. And there's just a number of topics and reasons why it's happening. But there's also reasons that we don't know, and we're still trying to figure that out. Just like we've have lots of, there's different organizations, researchers, and the First Nations all up and down the river on both Alaska or the U.S. side and Canadian side that are looking at what is happening, and doing multiple research on what's happening with it, with the salmon, and why are they declining at such great numbers, and drastically every year it's dropping.
So with these numbers declining over the years, what are some of the struggles that Indigenous people are facing in the Yukon when it comes to harvesting salmon, or I guess the lack thereof of harvesting? You mentioned the loss of culture to an extent, and how you guys haven't been able to harvest salmon. So what are some of the struggles faced with that?
Well, for one, we live in the north. Here at the headwaters, we live in an urban city, but many of The tribes in Alaska and our First Nations live in remote communities, and they rely on the salmon for food subsistence, and they don't have that. So now we're looking at buying salmon to replace the ones that we're not getting from other rivers. And so it's expensive, and you know, this is something that we've all looked forward to every year to sustain us through the winters, and also a healthy diet. That's a big thing. And you know, as some of our Indigenous people are facing different kind of diseases and diabetes or cancer, where salmon supplemented that with a healthy diet, the good fish oils and the food, and it was so good for you, and it kept us going for thousands of years. So for them to be disappearing and us not being able to fish, it has other factors as mental health. You know, we're not getting out to fish camps, we're not passing on those traditions to our children and our youth. So these with the number not being there, not being able to fish is taking a big toll on our people all up and down the river.
Mm-hmm. And we had touched on fish camps and how, you know, they used to be so regular for there to be fish camps and fish trips and that sort of thing, but those aren't really being done anymore. You know, what can be done to get back to that, or be able to, you know, have fish camps and have these fishing trips and sort of reclaim some of what was lost?
Well, what we're doing here is we're bringing back the annual salmon gatherings so that we can, you know, we're bringing in fish and still, you know, trying to bring back those practices of how to actually handle fish, and, you know, in a respectful way, and teaching each other and learning from our elders again of how to, you know, dry salmon and process salmon and still have salmon in our freezers. So those are some of the things that we're doing here. To bring back fish, to be able to have a fish camp again, that is as much as we can do at this point without, you know, taking maybe one or two. There's been some of that talk about, you know, just putting in a net and showing our youth how to like actually set a net again, and but not taking any more than maybe a two, just to have that understanding. But most times it's the processing of the fish. It's the fish that we brought in from other rivers that are nearby that are still healthy stocks, that have healthy stocks. So those are some of the things we're doing. But it's, you know, like I said, it's not the same. It's not the same as, you know, having Chinook at a number of that we can actually, or even chum in some of the other areas that we could actually process and start from that 1 week or 10 days that we're out at camp. So we're looking at different ways to reconnect with salmon, and, you know, listen to the stories of what our elders are told us, and the ones that have been able to have that experience of fish camp and being taught by their ancestors and their elders to do that. So those are some of the things that we're doing on this side, besides the, you know, some of the research projects that we're doing for us at Kwanlin Dün First Nation, and then the Headwaters, working with other First Nations that are here, Cartgrass First Nation and Tonquichin Council. We have a few projects that we work on for clearing passage, making sure their spawning grounds are clear of debris and that they can make it to their spawning grounds. You know, working on with the different organizations to see what we can do on our side, so that they when they do get here, that they don't have any more obstacles that they have to face coming up the river.
Well, that was kind of my next question. You sort of just answered most of it. I was going to ask, you know, what are some of the specific things that you and you know, these organizations and these First Nations are doing? And you'd mentioned trying to get how to get the salmon across. So, I mean, you basically answered my question, but it sounds like, you know, how is some of that work coming in terms of the more specific stuff of getting these salmon to these spawning grounds, and you know, other things that you're working on? Yeah,
well, you know, we're looking at ways that we can not handle fish right at this time. Like, you know, normally with the we have a Takini sonar project. That's where it counts fish, and when we look at that, it gives us a good idea of what the numbers are coming up, and then we can, you know, talk to our citizens and talk to the public about not fishing salmon, and like saying, okay, we're asking our citizens not to fish because the numbers are so low. that's one of our projects. Another project that's been running for over 25 years where we've been monitoring salmon. It's in the Michi Creek and McClintock area, which is one of the longest spawning grounds in the area, or in the world, actually. So it's over 3,000 kilometers that these salmon come up. And so for us, we make sure there's no log jams and beaver dams, and looking at if there's a slide, or we record temperature and see what's happening there. We count the reds, and we look at what the fry is, if there's still fry in the water. But we're also looking at other ways that we're working with different projects. Right now, we put in a funding application to look at fry mortality through our dam that's here in Whitehorse. And then, we have a couple other projects that we tried. We're in-stream incubation, but because the numbers are so low, we can't get brood stock to do that. So we took that away. So just looking at ways that we don't handle fish at all. And we're working with all the First Nations up and down the Yukon River, and we have a newly formed Salmon Stewardship Alliance with just about all Yukon First Nations, and how we work together, so we're not in silos, and seeing what we can all do together here in the Yukon to bring back salmon, or at least protect them and conserve at this point. And then, there's a bunch of us that sit on the Yukon River panel where we work with Alaska on, different management regimes that can kind of eliminate that interference with salmon so that they can make it to their spawning grounds here.
And Brandy, I'll leave it with this last question here: is what do you think will be the future of salmon and Indigenous people in the Yukon, or I guess where do you see sort of the salmon and the Yukon in a few years even?
Well, that's a tough question. I would like to hope, and I'm never going to give that up, and be optimistic that we will have salmon, and one day possibly have a fish camp that we're actually harvesting salmon from the Yukon River or our tributaries in a way that we used to. But I don't see that happening, probably not in my lifetime. I'm hoping that the next generation will be able to do that. But the connection that we have with salmon right now is doing everything we can to protect the salmon and make sure that they're still here in the water. Even if we're not fishing, we got to think about the land, the water, keeping it healthy, the animals, other animals that rely on salmon, and those animals are the ones that spread it and make sure that the nutrients are in the ground, and our trees are healthy, because we still have to rely on all that. And we got to remember the whole connection, how everything's connected, and that's one thing that we got to think about here. But for the future, I'm optimistic. I give tobacco every time I'm out in the water, and pray for the salmon to come back, and I know that others are doing the same, and just they're resilient. One day they may return. I mean, there's some of the sockeye stocks are coming back in rivers that they hadn't been there in a long time, and we're hoping that the Chinook will one day return to us at least in a number that maybe possibly we'll be able to harvest from the water.
Well, Brandy, we'll have to leave it there, but again, certainly appreciate your insight and your thoughts into what's happening with the salmon in the Yukon. Again, thank you very much for taking a few minutes out of your day, and miigwech.
Glad to do it. Gonna chase